very much for joining us. The future of film is green. You've heard a lot about the future of film today, and we're about to find out exactly how sustainability fits in the filmmaking process. We've got a wonderful panel right here. To my left is Lucy Stone, who is the director of Climate Spring, an organization dedicated to telling stories about the climate. Lucy Shia, the CEO of Foodterra, an organization dedicated to delivering change. We have Claire Ave and Mario Quiroz Grande, who are building the world's first sustainable studio in Portugal. And finally, we have Aliza Ayaz, a climate activist and UN Goodwill Ambassador. And I want you to realize here that you have individuals who put together work on every stage of the filmmaking process, starting with an original idea, a story, right? Before you roll with the cameras, you need words on a page. And that's exactly what you do. You help filmmakers and screenwriters come up with stories that can have a positive impact on climate change. Do tell us more.
Thank you so much, and great to be here in good company. Well, I think the story of climate change that's not being told is actually not about apocalypse and doom and gloom. I think we've had quite a lot of that. And as we know, climate change is now actually a lived experience for a lot of people. You don't have to understand and imagine and be an expert on the science. Most people understand climate change. They understand it's happening. They don't doubt it anymore. Interestingly, most people don't think that other people are with them, do they? You know, there's a lot of misunderstanding about where people are. And so the stories we're interested in seeding and supporting at Climate Spring are the stories that really help us unblock where we are collectively as a society at the moment, which is kind of in a bit of a fight or flight kind of freeze mode, where we can see the old systems are breaking down. We can see that the climate crisis isn't just happening, but that is a symptom of the problems of the way we live our societies at the moment. And so we need stories that break through that deadlock and show the way through. What does navigating through the climate crisis mean? What does it look like? What's that look like for me as an individual, as families, as a society? And those stories can be stories of collective agency, not just single heroes. And they can sort of signal and show they're sort of heralds of the future. And really that's such a powerful role that cinema has, particularly, and screen has, of showing and depicting ways through it. And so at Climate Spring, we're interested in anything that's not documentary. Not that documentary doesn't have a role to play. It has a very powerful role, particularly around campaigns. But we're interested in stories that show different narratives, different ways of being, that inspire and cultivate inspiration of what the future might look like. Yeah.
And Lucy, you work on a very similar topic because you help filmmakers and studios place products around sustainability and also tell more sustainable stories.
Yeah, thank you, Theo. Hello, everyone. So wonderful to be here. And again, great company on this panel. So I'm Lucy Shea. I'm the CEO of Foodterra. And Foodterra is a mission. And our mission is to make the Anthropocene awesome. And the Anthropocene is, you know, the recent age of humans, and often it's talked about in, oh, it's too fucking late and we've completely fucked this all up. But actually, if we get ourselves into this mess, we can get ourselves out of it. So the way we activate on that mission is as a change agency, so a consultancy on sustainability, and we work with the film and TV industries, but also brands and non-profits, etc. Also with the non-profit, we have a training arm, which we call kind of sex ed for sustainability, kind of anything you wanted to know, but we're afraid to ask. And then we also do some product development as well. But for here, the piece I just wanted to say was what we do here is so important, and it's now been validated by the IPCC. So the IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change, Nobel, award-winning scientists working together to figure out how we can solve climate change. For the first time, they have validated this industry. They have said that demand-side mitigation is important for climate change. So what we all do in our lives and how we live and how we eat and how we travel, and socio-cultural change can accelerate climate mitigation. And that's us. That's the advertising and all the rest of it industries, but that is the film and TV industry. So the stories that we tell, the behaviours that we promote, the positive narratives that we can bring rather than climate dystopia, 100% on that, is critically important in the fight on climate change and keeps us culturally relevant and commercially successful, because this is what the audiences of today want to see. I will stop soon, but there was this great quote, I can't remember who said it, that said, if you're not putting climate change in your material, then it's science fiction, because this is the world we're living in today. So IPC says we're important.
Alisa, you're an activist. My understanding is an activist basically is dedicated to delivering change across society. What story do you think need to be told by the filmmakers here to achieve your goal?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. First of all, I think it's incredible to be here, to be a member of the youth population, to be a woman leader, to be a woman of color. And on that note, I think when we think about climate change growing up, it was always in the news, it was always in the papers, and it was a far-reaching, big global issue. All the white men, the politicians and scientists were talking about it, and I was a scared little girl. What can I do about this? I mean, I don't feel any kind of link. My future is gone, and I'll leave it to the old scientists who probably know what's best. And it was that sense of disconnect and distance that built the barrier in disabling me to access all the affordable and convenient solutions that now exist and are more that we're more well aware of on a day-to-day basis. So whether it's recycling or cycling to work or vegetarian diets, shopping less, traveling less, carbon neutral flights, those are all options that we're much more well aware of. And so there was this disconnect which is slowly being addressed, but we need a lot more attention on it. And I'm talking about influence, money, power, more voices. And that links back to the work that I do as an activist. It's with self-awareness. And every human individual that we work with, every company that we work with, whether they're left wing or right wing, whether they're nature fanatics or corporate capitalist, we've worked with them all. And the reason is because we're not sat on the other side of the table. Rather, we tell them we're here for diplomacy. I'm going to sit next to you. We're going to walk you through all the challenges, all the resistance and hesitance you have when it comes to focusing on climate action. And, we've learned that, of course, there's lots of different ultimatums and political agendas and personal interest or economic vested interest that often undermine their efforts towards climate action. However, when you make them aware that their background or their job description, that there's some link to climate action, whether it's having a meeting with their boss or their supply chain manager, or talking to their social committee about an initiative that focuses on educational workshops, educating specific colleagues on the impacts of climate change locally and globally. I think that builds a momentum, a vicious cycle, and then that cycle is a good vicious cycle rather than a negative vicious cycle, which is, greenhouse gas emissions, people trying to get electric cars, really expensive electric cars, which are not affordable. Then that builds another negative race. People are already quite in a social disparity of economics. They can't afford different climate solutions. And so when we come in as activists, as young people, we think we want someone to bridge the gap and we want more light and more support. And hopefully that's going to come into being slowly and surely.
And right next to you are two people who are bridging the gap, who are doing the good work.
Awesome.
And we're building the world's first sustainable studio, Tage Studios in Portugal. You're opening in 2 years. Tell us more.
Hopefully in 2 years, yeah.
Hopefully, okay.
We never know. We never.
She's a lawyer, but she says hopefully maybe 3 years. Okay.
Yes. Well, basically, we've been like the sponsor of the studio, whose name is David Halliday. Had the great idea 6 years ago to build up. So before the COVID, before even the need of even more streaming, he has the idea of creating the first eco-friendly, sustainable studio, because he's someone who's extremely involved in all the ecology and as well the animal cause. We'll talk more about this later. But his idea was basically to be the first, but not the last. Basically to create something which is not existing at the moment, i.e. a studio which has been thought carefully from the first phase to the last one, thought as well in terms of licensing, in terms of building, in terms of construction, in terms of equipment, and in terms of day-to-day working, for it to be a zero net energy studio. We're going to have two certification, one which is the US equivalent of LEED, which is BREEAM, and one which is a very specific certification, which is called biodiversity, which is related to fauna and flora and the protection of fauna and flora. And his idea was really to be like the industry, the movie industry has to give. We need to give example, because we reach people on a daily basis at home. When you watch Netflix, when you watch Amazon, when you watch a film, you are in front of your TV. Everyone worldwide, everyone from Asia to America, everyone is watching TV. So there's so much impact we can have, and the first one who has to be responsible is the one where the magic is created, i.e. in the studio. And so his idea was to be the first one to give an example to the industry, not to be just saying, oh, we've been the first and the last. No, to be the first and to give the example for a lot of others, hopefully.
So how is this studio actually going to look like and function? And Maria, you're in charge of the construction and design of it. So can you please make us visualize it?
Yeah, so the studio has been designed, as Claire says, since the very, very first phase. As a real challenge to have this, we took these certifications as a framework, because regulations, they was not 6 years ago. Today, we can see some regulations are applicable today, but we wanted to go really not greenwashing, but really to be sustainable. It's for that we choose like the brand for all the energy and efficiency of the buildings. So the studio has been designed in a way that to be flexible as well for the future if we need to change, so we don't need to demolish, so to reduce any waste material. As well on the shape, it has been densified, so to avoid any soil, waterproofing, to have efficient circulation. So we have like a core of the studio will be like a pedestrian and with a soft mobility as well, which will save CO2 emissions. And then all the stages has been designed from a technical point of view with equipment really with carefully structural and equipment, MEP equipment calculation to not oversize the old equipment. As well on materials. So it has been a challenge because it has been the design. We really work with the architects, but as well when tendering, construction companies, they are not used to have requirements to have like local materials, for example. So we are like requiring all materials to be a big percentage of the materials locally produced to avoid as well to reduce CO2 emissions. So there is a big part on the construction. And then the biodiversity certification just Claire introduced. There's many factors taken into account to preserve fauna and flora. So since the very beginning, we had like an ecologist doing like a deep study of the land. Then we preserve all the fauna and flora, and then as well we implement like all the design to avoid bed collision, reduction of light pollution. We have like all the vegetation we are doing is like not invasive vegetation. So it's like a global design. And from a operational point of view, will be like as well having some clause with the future, for example, restaurant catering, having measures that will share the values of the studio.
I see. And what strikes me when I've heard each of you speak now is that you believe change is possible. You're not fatalistic. There are a lot of people that are fatalistic in society right now and saying the climate, we're doomed. What's the point of doing anything? Presumably, you also believe something can be done. That's why you came. And is that important to share a positive message in the stories you're telling, in the way you'll be making your film, in your activism, to go against the grain and the just doomsters?
Yes, I want to tell you a story that maybe highlights this. As Lucy said, I mean, we have all the evidence we need and all the science and the technology and the solutions that we possibly need are there, have been there for a long time. So it is a fixable problem. That's not to underestimate the scale of the challenge. It is an epic challenge, transitioning away from fossil fuels. But I want to tell you a story that kind of encapsulates why this maybe hasn't happened. So back in 1947, there was a film that was a huge commercial hit that year. It won an Oscar, and it was made by a major Hollywood director who was very successful at the time. And it was called The Louisiana Story. You probably haven't heard of it. 1947. I'll forgive you. And the story was about a sweet little 10-year-old boy who lived in the Bayou in Louisiana in a very impoverished family. They lived in a sort of wooden shack with no running water and no electricity. And then the oil company comes to his village and transforms the community, gives them jobs and gives them running water and electricity. And it really was arguably the starting point at which mass media, particular film, started propagating this narrative that the fossil fuel industry is the backbone of the economy. And without the fossil fuel industry, we're going to live in wooden shacks without running water and electricity. And what we found out recently is that film was commissioned by Standard Oil. They literally bought the Hollywood director and paid him and asked him to make this film because in that year, public opinion tide was shifting against Standard Oil because the impacts, at that point, the impacts were about the health impacts of the workers and the communities living around fossil fuel, often also working class communities of colour often were the ones most impacted. And they could see public opinion was turning, government probably going to introduce regulation. And it really worked. It completely turned public opinion. And so the fossil fuel have been gaslighting us for now 70 years and of telling us that they are vital and important. And without them, everything will fall apart, when frankly the opposite is the case. So it goes to show the hugely important role that cinema and the screen industry plays. And we've perhaps forgotten that role that cinema can play of really, shifting the narratives of what's possible. So yeah.
So you're going to make the new Louisiana Story.
You need the opposite.
You're working on that.
Yeah.
You can shoot it at the studio.
Exactly.
But there is a question. How do you make the new Louisiana Story without making it sanctimonious? Because people don't want to be lectured. They don't like it when Hollywood celebrities come and go like, hey, you should go green, blah, blah, blah. You need to do it in a way that's subtle and effective and doesn't feel like you're just lecturing or talking down to the audience. How do you achieve this? It's a very difficult balance.
I mean, that's why the Louisiana Story worked, right? It wasn't a fossil fuels industry obvious, it was subtle. So absolutely, it can't be making everyone feel more guilty than they already perhaps feel. It needs to be subtle. So I'll give you an example of one of the films we've supported at the moment. It's called After the Floods, and it is a kind of 6-part ITV British primetime drama. And it's essentially a murder mystery story. And it's a story of a dead body being washed up in a flood, and it's a murder mystery. Who did it? Who done it? And that's how it will be marketed. This is the important point. It's not going to be marketed as it's a climate story. It's like extrapolations. It's just a great drama. In the backdrop of the story, they're grappling with flooding, increased flooding because of climate change, how to prevent that. In the backdrop of the story, there's farmers grappling with transitioning away from industrial farming practices. So it's seeding in the backdrop of the story, the transitions that we're going through, and making it great entertainment. And crucially, it's a commercial industry. We're in a market space. And if it's going to reach audiences, it needs to be commercially viable, it needs to be entertaining, and it needs to be engaging, crucially, yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And just to circle back to that optimism or fatalism piece for a moment, and then to come back to the commercial piece, 1 in 5 young people is a climate fatalist now. And again, it's well funded by the fossil fuel industry. And if you look at the sites that used to be climate denial have flipped overnight to now climate delay. So it's not that folks really think there wasn't climate change. It was well funded, and now the game in town is to delay. So no longer deny, that's no longer plausible, but now we delay. We use the fossil fuel industry uses all sorts of narratives, like you can only take action if you're really perfect, or, never mind about fossil fuels, what about all these other sources of emissions from agriculture, etc. So it's a well-established playbook that we're working against here. But if you work on climate, you tend to be an optimist. So the closer you are to working on climate, the more of a solutionist you are. Because again, you know that all these things exist. So again, the role of film and TV to mainstream, popularise, show cultural norms, etc. But I just wanted to spend a moment on, there's some other routes to think about as well, such as the power of parables. And if you look at a lot of the youth climate activists who are now into their 20s, lots of young women and very forceful, lots of rage, and been very successful in shifting big business approach on this. And if you talk to a lot of them, they've all watched The Hunger Games. And The Hunger Games, very commercially successful, is a fight of youth against the big baddie. So you can read The Hunger Games as a parable of society against the fossil fuel industry. So I just, there's many different ways to do this, from profiling behaviours to creating positive solutions to visions of a future, to thinking about parables that can actually activate the work that we need to do now.
Lisa, so you were nodding when she mentioned the Hunger Games. Is that a movie that inspired your activism? Is she describing
lots of movies. I think I'm from an age group. I'm a Gen Z member. Anything that I see on the TV and social media and magazines, we're easily influenced. We're easily tempted, and that also means we're easily moldable. So if you say the right words and do the right magic, we'll do the right thing. For me, filmmaking and activism is the same thing. They both affect social change. And that is why when I founded my NGO called the Climate Action Society, that is entirely student-led, has no funding, is completely run by students for climate advocacy and climate action and climate workshops. When I first started this NGO as a student club, no one was interested. None of my friends, no one at university. There were other clubs like the Coffee Society and the Chess Society and the Football Club that everybody was going to. They were going out clubbing, and I was that boring nerd with the Climate Action Club. So I thought to myself, what do I do? How do I get people in? And then I put posters out about a chocolate fountain and a nice party and a picnic, free sandwiches and free drinks. Wow, it was sold out. Lots and lots of people came. And once I got them hooked in, then I sold them the message of climate action. We got a beautiful artist who painted the visual imaginary of climate action, how it was changing the world. And then we got a panel of lawyers and bankers and financiers who spoke about the future of their businesses and climate action. So all those university students who were really busy and keen to fast track into the world of finance and job applications are more likely to get sucked into the capitalist world, I already cornered them in and I told them, look, there is a couple of people doing what you're going to be doing, and there's a better way to do it. Similarly, at any workshop that we had or any event that we had, we always gave out freebies that were fun. We had poetry night. Poetry is known to evocate lots of emotions, can again cause you to feel very emotional. So I think every background and every job description can be individualized to climate action. And for me, filmmaking is the same. If we make the right content that glues to people's emotions and actually is at the same time meaningfully impactful for the purpose of the world. And that's why we need to redefine what matters to us. And so growing up, I would probably choose a career that serves me purpose and serves my mom and dad a purpose. But I think now my generation has to be much more thoughtful, and we have to think, does it serve the world a purpose as well, locally, regionally, nationally, as long as I think about others. And that cycle of thoughtfulness is something that can come through filmmaking, definitely.
And your generation is also demanding change, and demanding change from the powers that be. Now at Tage Studios, you've not even built the studios, but you already have filmmakers and studios who are interested in shooting in them. They're not doing that just because they're good, they're also doing that because they feel that there is a market demand.
Right. There's a market demand and there's, I said, some awareness. Maybe later, but later is better than never, right? I'm as well quite positive in the way that I don't think like if everything is black, okay, what's the point of trying, So I guess every step is important. But yes, we've been discussing with various production company, extremely big one, major one, and more size one, but which is interesting is that all of them, yes, they want to shoot in a green place and want to know that there will be kind of a green seal on their production, of if they're being asked, saying that basically what they done for this movie or for this TV show has been done in a studio which is actually sustainable.
Well, let's talk about that, because we heard about the Albert certificate in the Awards panel earlier, which is basically a certificate given to TV shows and film that says that they follow a certain number of sustainable norms. Are you working on developing something a bit more systemic? Just like I remember when I was growing up here in France, we had like the fair trade logos on various foods. And people knew, okay, that's legit. Are you going to do something like that before a film so we know, wow, that was made using sustainable methods and can become a brand?
I would just, we're not, but I would just love to say, I'd love to see something. Is it the Bechdel test?
We're doing.
You go. Oh, okay, you go.
But yes.
Go.
Well, firstly, there are some schemes that certify on the production side. So in the UK, there's BAFTA Albert, and there are others that give that kind of certification on the green production process. But we are, unveiling here. So the Bechdel test is, the gender test. And in a way, there's a lot of parallels between women's representation and gender equality on the screen and climate. And so we're developing a climate reality test. So it's the kind of content certification, if you like, as opposed to the production certification. And it's basically a test that says it's to meet the quote, which is, I think, Kim Stanley Robinson, who wrote the book. Yeah. If your story is set now or in the future, and it's not sci-fi, if it doesn't somehow allude to the crisis that we're living through, it is it's going to look tone deaf, and the audience are going to increasingly find it irrelevant. Your story is going to become redundant. And then there's a kind of higher standard, which is what would good storytelling look like in content. So that's what we help, along with other organisations, give that advice, as well as the funding and support of how you tell the climate story. And, not to feel alone on that. Everyone's grappling with that, and there are lots of people who can help.
And I would think there's going to be more and more interest in that. I mean, just to draw a parallel to other industries that we work in, there's, sorry, excuse geeky terminology for a moment, but WBCSD, World Business Council on Sustainable Development, has just published its framework on avoided emissions. So that's if a company has tackled all of its scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So in its how it purchases electricity, how it manages its own operations, and how it accounts for emissions up and down its supply chain through its consumers and with its suppliers, then and only then it should start looking at avoided emissions. So that's societal emissions. So really the bench test needs to be, if we're not shifting the needle on 1.5 degree climate temperature change, that's the benchmark we need to be going for now. So if you've done everything across your value chain and we're still not there, then we need to be looking at societal level emissions. So what can you do as a business or a storyteller, whatever it may be, to get folks to not emit carbon emissions in the first place? And that's avoided emissions. And there's a whole framework coming on that from the business sector. And it's going to the G7. It's going to get some policy force behind it. So I think we're going to see much of this developing.
I see. Now, another important point here in movies is the products that are showcased via product placement. If you think of like James Bond's car, right, that's iconic. That's influenced the mindset of so many different people. And I know that both Tage Studio and you, Lucy, are working with businesses, green businesses, to help them place their products as part of more sustainable stories. Can you tell us more about this?
We do more behavioural placement.
Okay.
But looking at businesses who perhaps might traditionally do product placement and thinking about how you might integrate that piece you said earlier about people hate to be hit over the head, but actually like peripheral processing is often more effective. So, example, this isn't one of ours, but NBC had its Green Week for some years where they would have in the same week all of the programs would place behaviors. So you might have Tina Fey and 30 Rock just throwing her water bottle into the recycling rather than the trash can, or a nurse on Mercy organising a fun bike ride or something like that. I mean, it's a little bit trite in some ways, but that type of piece I think is really interesting.
And so, it's definitely something we're working with others on. Planet placement, some people call it, yeah. And it's a way you can bring kind of climate, behavioural changes into the story without changing your story. So in fact, any stories that you're making, you can think about, do they need to fly? Could they be getting the train? That's a kind of easy win. It doesn't have to be a climate story. You can kind of build it in. Netflix recently announced they're going to only feature electric cars in all their productions, I think now. And that's a start. That's one thing. Electric cars are not going to solve all our problems, but that is a step forward. So it's kind of and not being kind of not unwittingly being fossil fuel product placement. I think is key. Yeah.
And Taj, you're also working on similar issues.
Well, we're going to work, if I may.
Please.
No, well, the point is indeed, again, I'm always going back to this picture. We're all watching TV, and we are all influenced by what we see on TV. The cars, obviously, is a good example, or the drink, or the dresses, or whatsoever, the makeup used by the lady in the TV show who's looking fabulous. All this kind of thing is something indeed that if we can either suggest to the production who will come to use this kind of product, or because we're planning in a close future to have a production company to as well related to the studio within our production to have this kind of, I didn't know the expression until today, but planet placement. I really like this one. So planet placement product, we will definitely do it. Yeah.
I think both topics when it comes to looking at refurbishing big buildings, places where the films are made. At my university, we're a graduate from University College London, in London. We've got a really famous school of filmmaking. Lots of successful students go on to be famous directors and producers, or make great impactful documentaries that are featured at student festivals. And when we launched a student club the Climate Action Student Club, we wrote a petition to every single of the 52 departments at UCL to ensure that they are creating a plan towards a sustainable transition of their buildings to moving away from fossil fuels and making sure their urban redevelopment plans are in line with Sustainable Development 2030 goals. And that meant that actually UCL halted one of their plans to build a new library, brought in a new team of sustainable consultants because of the pressure that was built in by a bunch of students, including me, protesting outside the Chancellor's door and telling them, stop before it's too late. The team of sustainable consultants come in, and now if you go in London on Euston Street, we have the world's first completely eco-friendly run library. Every single element, from the desk to the chair to the lighting. And you know, it's great because I was invited there and I was part of the team that was cutting the ribbon, and I felt great. But it made me feel there's a lot more to do. So being a young person who realizes that there's so much to do means that there's good room for change, and there's really influential thinkers, positive people who want to make social positive change, but at the same time they're, like Lucy said, it's an epic challenge, and there's lots of barriers that you don't even realize until you come across them. And then that's where the behavioral psychology part of climate change is so important. And yes, you can have all the world's metrics and qualifications that we can make sure filmmakers or financiers have to attest to and is a must for them. But rather than making that as a task or a tick box exercise, if we continue to have behavioral change workshops that focus on their cognitive behavior, the psychological actions, how they absorb information, what's important to, who do they need to be accountable to, and creating that system of accountability and transparency, ensuring that climate action fundamentally restructures society rather than just making them afraid. Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
the lady in the first row also applauded about the library earlier, I noticed.
Yeah, thank you.
All of your pioneers. Climate Spring, I believe, is the first company of its kind.
Yes.
Tage Studio is the very first sustainable studio. You're at the forefront. But how quickly do you think things can really change for the better? Because things happen very fast now. We have this conversation in 5 years. Maybe there is 100 companies like Climate Spring. We have 10 sustainable studios in the world. Which direction do you think the wind is blowing here?
I'll just jump in quickly and say, I'm going to give a little plug. My colleague Solitaire Townsend has written a book called How to Be a Solutionist, available on Amazon and all good suppliers. And there's a piece in there which has actually made me feel more positive and hopeful, because working this every day and being a solutionist, you still sometimes think, oh my God, are we going to make it? And she's pulled out a whole load of data and research showing the hockey stick, that actually how change happens is never linear. It never goes from A to B in a line like this, the isosceles triangle. It basically goes along the ground and then whoop, up, whether it's adoption of solar, whether it's the cost of renewables coming down, whether it's acceptability of equal marriage. If you look at it, it's all whoop, hockey stick. And the problem is we all thought that climate action was going to be like this. And we're just on the turning point now. So I think it's exponentially going to change in the next 7 years. And it's the most exciting, thrilling, epic, scary, and exciting time to be working on these issues right now.
Yeah, I totally echo that. I totally agree. And I'll just give you an example of how I think that is. We are at the sort of turning point of huge change in all sectors, in fact. So we're talking about the screen industry, but every single sector is grappling with this. And lots of young people are climate quitting their jobs, are holding their employers to account, are pushing internally and externally. Every industry globally is grappling with this. And just to give you an example of how fast this is happening, yes, we're 1 and a bit year old organisation. First one, we have a global agenda, and we hope we're the first of many, and that soon all films will be climate films and not just a niche kind of audience. But just to give you an example of the scale of interest, we've been completely overwhelmed by the amount of support needed by Climate Spring, we did a competition for. We generally work with existing talent, so existing experienced writers and directors and producers. We did a competition for new talent, and we had. And it was a modest amount of support we were offering. We had about 500 people applied, and it was a few weeks we opened this for. We didn't massively promote it, just in the UK with BFI and BBC. And and even the BBC and BFI said, yeah, that's quite a lot. That's quite a lot, actually. And that was just the tipping point, of interest. So we're trying to build this as a movement. And we're working also with actors who are also talking about a conversation happening amongst the acting community, how they want to be part of the climate movement. So it is a movement that's building, I think.
And Claire and Maria, same thing for
Yeah.
you. Is green filmmaking about to become the way most movies are made in the next decade or 2 decades?
We hope so. Yeah, we completely agree, and we have seen already the interest. There is the interest of the companies. We have been challenged from a technical point of view. Is they can film the same way, they can do the same. We are, for example, in Tage studio, we are producing 100% of the electricity during the day with the photovoltaic panels. So they were like, can we? I mean, we'll have any problem with electricity? No, we won't have any problem with it. So if they can do the same, but in a better way, why not? So we don't see no reason today. This technology has really progressed. Everything is helping to use properly buildings and in everything way. Why will not do? So we can see an interest from them. Every single company, they are pushing for ESG measures, increase the. So I think in a way will not change. After today, there is an issue with the cost of sustainability. Because, for example, in this project, we can see this has been a cost, which is an issue that maybe is just counterbalancing the progress, the evolution. But hoping will be like governmental action, so a state level that will help sustainability incentive with the cost of sustainability, because of course has a cost, and any business need to work.
Well, on this point, do you all think that film funds, awards, we had a panel about awards earlier, award ceremonies need to do more to highlight sustainable filmmaking and green filmmaking? We're here to offer a solution. I'm sure you've all thought about this. What should they do?
I think they should have a green carpet, not a red carpet.
Okay. Well, I mean,
That's how
they're
they
wearing
should start.
green.
We agree.
And yeah, we'll know how to dress up for that
Exactly.
for sure. I think just reflecting on the previous question as well, I think the wind is blowing, and I agree with everyone on the panel here. But there's also a segment of the population, unfortunately, that belongs to climate deniers, or people who have very different beliefs from us. And while this epic challenge lays ahead in front of us, and we're making great strides in success, sometimes as a member of the youth, I feel like the wind's blowing east and then west, and I'm shaken up. So I think for the people who are making the films, it's the same. Depending on who pays them and what's popular, their interests can move. And I mean, as a young individual, I'll follow whatever's trending. I'm so easily malleable. It's so hard to follow my will and keep my strength and my morals true and very true to my integrity, keep my morals up to the environment. Every day I struggle. Should I go fly on this holiday with these friends? Should I buy this new dress? And I'm constantly trying to come back to accounting for my carbon footprint. I'm hoping that as this wind is blowing, whatever direction, there are people at the other end that keep blowing that wind. So hopefully we will have that green carpet at Cannes one day.
Plus
That's
one.
a prophecy right there. I wonder whether anyone in the audience have questions they would like to ask our panelists. Do you want? Well, I'll come and give you the mic. And if before you ask your question, maybe you introduce yourself, tell us your connection to the film industry. It's always interesting to hear.
Hi all, my name is Lavanya. I am a filmmaker and also currently work at a talent agency, so kind of tangentially touch multiple parts of the businesses or of the entertainment business in the US. And I guess I'm wondering, kind of continuing this conversation we're having, right? We know that this is like a hockey stick and kind of an exponential curve. But it seems like in Europe, there's a lot going on and a lot of implementation and a lot of changes that people are trying to make. Same with Tage, right? It's a European-based production studio. But in the US, that isn't necessarily the case, right? And so my question is, what can we be doing in the US, right? Especially because the market right now, if any of you are American, is very crazy. You know, everyone's on strike. No one really is working to get changes made. But sustainability is another component of that. But we don't have, you know, a green guild, for example, to go on strike and say, until these changes are implemented, we can, you know, we're not going to work. So what do you foresee given a market like the US with studios, fully studios, all of whom back the biggest Hollywood directors, producers, actors? How can you foresee us kind of persuading them to institute global green policies going forward as quickly as possible?
I'll just jump in and say we do actually work in the States a lot, and we work with some of the studios, and we also work with some of the agencies, and we also work with some of the platforms, so the creator and influencer platforms like TikTok and Meta and YouTube, etc. And I'm picking something up. There's something in the ether about a real, again, the hockey stick thing of a kind of a movement of folks developing, looking at how all these different creators, parts of the creative and storytelling industries can start to kind of hold hands a bit and start to work to integrate content, basically. But I do wonder if that creator influencer piece might be quite an unlock there, because there's an increasing recognition, again from IPCC, that influencers and creators are enormous role models. And there's been recent research out showing that for the public, influencers and creators are their most trusted source of sustainability knowledge. So I wonder if there might be some kind of creators with the agencies, the talent agencies and the producers starting to get a bit of a movement going there. So, but that's just a jump in. There might be others with.
Well, if I may just, I kind of disagree with what you were saying. I just rewinding. We were actually in the US. We were in LA 2 months ago, and we had the luck to attend a conference which was actually dedicated to environment in the media industry, not only the movie industry, but in the media industry more generally speaking. And they're trying. You know, there's a lot of change going on right now in the US. I feel like the industry is much more aware in the US than in Europe, or at least in Europe, it's more localized. You know, you have something in Portugal, then you're going to have something in France, then you're going to have something, I don't know, in the UK, and then something else in Germany. There's not like a cohesion that you can find in the US. And we've been, you know, we saw in the US, at least when it comes to studios, that they're trying to evaluate. They're like a Universal Studio, for instance. Now every studio they're building up has to have the lead label. Apple, for instance, they only do right now green seal production, and we know Amazon is going on that way as well. We know, so there's change are coming for sure. Then, you know, the fact to influence, to push them even more, I would say, or maybe this kind of panel, and the fact to be able as well to talk about different kind of certification, because the one we have, for instance, for the studio, the biodiversity one, does not exist in the US. There's not something equivalent. So to push them maybe to diversify the certification. And as Maria was mentioning before, you know, the cost is something which is important, because unfortunately we're talking about business here. So money is the key factor. So I guess for all the country, not only the US, but all the country, to really become aware is to have and to act more, being more conscious of what they're doing. They need to have a money factor involved, unfortunately. So either like some incentive from the government, or maybe from the public, a reaction from the public, like going more watching production which have green seal, or indeed having the influencer, the actor, the director talking about it. But I think, unfortunately, the money factor has to be involved.
I think there was another question, 2 questions here. I can hear you, yeah. Do you want my...
Yes. Oh, hi. Hi, my name's Caitlin. I'm a freelance filmmaker. I've spent the past 2 years making films for the International Red Cross. That's the arm of the Red Cross that works in war zones. I most recently made a film in the Gaza Strip about climate change, and that's somewhere that perhaps you don't normally see climate narratives from. So my question is to this panel, what climate stories are we missing? Are we telling enough diverse climate stories? And you are obviously people who are connected to this, to the ground. So where do you see the gap that us as filmmakers should be filling?
Please.
That's a great question. I love it. Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, we do need a diversity of stories, and we're not getting them. I think we probably all agree on that one. Maybe less lone hero stories, maybe less of that, because if you look at the
less tech bros,
technology will not save us, I'm afraid. Sorry. I think we've tried to kind of break it down into different story types at Climate Spring, and we're actually starting to commission as well because we think we need to seed some of the stories. So I think we need more world building. That's one of the cinematic superpowers, right? Imagine conjuring up the world in which we have navigated through the climate crisis. What does that look like? And have some fun with it. Have some world building fun. That's one type of stories we're not seeing. And that needs to be quite country specific, community. Having lots of different world building we need, not just American world building. I think we need stories that show people navigating through the crisis. So there are lots of good stories. In fact, in fiction, in literary fiction, there's a whole genre now called cli-fi, climate fiction. And there's some beautiful, wonderful novels being published, but they tend to the story stops in the experience of the climate impacts. And that has a role to play because it brings it to life and makes you connect emotionally. But showing you go through that crisis, I think we need lots of those stories because also there are lots of people doing that right now. So there are lots of people who are navigating through the climate crisis. And so, yeah, those are the types of stories I'd say that I think we're missing, but other you might want to add.
And no more dramatic story as well, because I guess, people... I'm talking about myself actually, but I feel like a lot of people like that too. When you turn on your TV again, still, you do not necessarily want to see negative things because on a daily basis we have to go through a lot of negativity. So maybe to put the drama as they are, because they are there anyway. So we cannot deny, but maybe to put a little more light at the end of the tunnel, I guess it could as well make something. Yeah.
I think we need to suggest that we have time. We are still on time to react. It's not like we are going straight forward. It's like giving the people ideas that yes, we have time and we can have a success with this 1.5 degree less. But okay, it's time to act. So yeah, no, not just more tragic and apocalypse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that you made a movie at the Gaza Strip about climate change makes me think you're on the right tangent, and I hope more and more people come on that tangent. And yeah, diversity and inclusivity is a big component in climate stories. And when we talk about climate change, it's not just rural villages in Pakistan, India, deprived communities. It's also war zones, conflict areas that are in the news every day, and people are tired of seeing them in the news every day because, the war has been going on for years, for months, we can't do anything. But climate change is also in cities like London. There's heat waves that affect mental health of people, of corporate workers. So the physical and mental health effects of climate change are very much real. So that's the diversity of climate change amongst poor people, middle class people, elite people, across all communities, shapes and sizes.
That's another great example for the kind of stories that can be told around climate change. Would you like to ask your question now?
Hi. Yeah, my name is Alice. I'm from Sweden and I'm a green consultant. First, I wanted to fill in the quote that you said before. If climate is not in your story, it's science fiction. It's by Dorothy Fortenberry, who director of Handmaid's Tale and Extrapolations. Yeah, great quote. Yes, and I was curious about Climate Spring and if you only operate like in England or in UK, or if it's also like
Global, yeah.
Okay, cool. How do how do you do that? Like how do you connect with other countries and, for example, Swedish filmmakers?
So, I mean, we've started with English language, internationally, and not just in the UK. But we are increasingly being approached by other filmmakers across Europe, and yeah, we're open for applications and interest. We tend to fund the early stage development. That's, as you all know, the hard stage. But also we provide support on developing the climate story for existing commissions or commissions that might be quite far down the line in development. And then crucially, we have a kind of industry panel that can help apply that commercial lens of how to make it commercially viable. So yes, you can contact us through our website. And
then I know a couple films coming up that I shall refer you to.
If you know any Swedish filmmakers who are looking to make a film in 2025, maybe
Awesome.
2026, right there you can shoot it in Portugal. Because your studio is not just for European filmmakers, but it's really for global filmmakers.
Right. We've been trying to fill the gap, which was fill the lack, actually, not the gap, fill the lack which was existing in Portugal, because they had some infrastructure, but more dedicated to local size production, so small and medium. And we are really aiming to reach a global production, notably US one, but as well Indian one, which are quite big. We really want to talk to local, like globally, not just locally. It's not that we're not interested into that, but the size of the complex and the way it's been made and the ambition we have behind, i.e. communicating around the studio and its practice, cannot only be done on a local level. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming, for your insights, for your questions. Can you please join me in a round of applause for our panelists? I would also like to thank Think Film right there who put these events together. No.
Thank you very much. I'm Amy. I'm the COO at Think Film. It's been such a delight to have you all with us this afternoon. We've had a roller coaster of discussions. Thank you to everyone that stayed for all three. You are champions. I hope you are all enlightened and inspired by impACT. Thank you once again to our panelists here. And if you're interested to hear more about Tage Studios, just as the panel closes, we've got a short video that they've prepared to give you some visuals of the studio and kind of give you a bit more of a glimpse into what it's going to be like. So thank you once again, and I hope you have a great rest of your can.
Thank you very much.